Good evening, fellow time travelers, and welcome back to Slumber Through Time. I'm your host, and tonight we're embarking on an extraordinary journey to ancient Alexandria, where you'll experience life as a young copyist in the greatest library system the world has ever known. Before we begin our adventure, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy immersive historical storytelling, and subscribe to join our community of time travelers. I love hearing from listeners around the world, so please let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global family of history lovers. Tonight's story is special. You'll become Ketty, a 14-year-old boy whose life spans one of history's most crucial periods. First, as a nervous newcomer in the public library of the great Serapeum in 200 BCE, when young Ptolemy V rules a kingdom under Roman protection. Then, decades later, as a master scribe who has earned his place in the elite Mouseion itself, facing the crisis that would scatter Alexandria's scholars across the Mediterranean world. This is a journey of discovery, devotion, and the timeless dream of rising through merit and dedication. You'll prepare precious papyrus scrolls, learn the secrets of ancient scripts, and witness how knowledge preserved by humble hands can light the way for future civilizations. So now, settle into your most comfortable position. Perhaps adjust your pillows, pull up that blanket, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle background sound. Let the modern world fade away as we travel back over 2 millennia to an age when all human knowledge was being gathered, copied, and preserved in one magnificent city. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let yourself drift back through time. To become Ketty, aspiring copyist in the libraries of Alexandria. The massive stone doors of the Serapeum swing open before you, and for a moment your breath catches in your throat. You are Kheti, a boy of 14 summers, son of Seneb the papyrus craftsman, and you stand at the threshold of the daughter library of Alexandria, the public repository that houses copies of the great scrolls from the legendary Mouseion itself. Your heart pounds with nervous excitement that mingles anticipation with fear. Behind you lie the familiar streets of the artisan quarter where you grew up among the honest sounds of workshops and the comforting rhythms of daily craft. Ahead stretches a world more vast than your young mind can fully comprehend. Halls lined with thousands of scrolls, scholars from distant lands, the accumulated wisdom of civilizations gathered under one roof. The temple guard at the entrance, noting your humble clothing and the scroll case your father crafted for this day, offers an encouraging nod. Another young Egyptian seeking to serve the written word, he observes kindly. Master Apollodoros mentioned he was expecting someone with knowledge of papyrus craft. You manage to find your voice, though it emerges smaller than you intended. I am Ketty, son of Seneb. I come to work as a copyist if my skills prove worthy. The Serapeum welcomes all who serve learning with honest hearts. The guard replies. May the gods guide your hands to preserve wisdom for generations yet unborn. As you step across the threshold into the great temple library, the sheer scope of what surrounds you strikes like a gentle wave that washes away everything you thought you knew about books and learning. The first thing that overwhelms you is the sound. Not the raucous noise of the marketplace or the rhythmic hammering of workshops, but something entirely new. The constant, gentle murmur of dozens of voices engaged in the sacred act of reading aloud. Here, in the Serapeum, students and scholars vocalize the words of Homer and Hesiod, of Egyptian wisdom literature and Greek mathematical treatises, creating a whispered symphony of human understanding. The second thing that captures your attention is the smell, a complex perfume unlike anything in your father's chamber. The dry, slightly sweet scent of thousands of papyrus scrolls mingles with the sharper tang of ink and the warm, comforting smell of oil lamps that burn throughout the day to supplement the natural light filtering through high windows. Underneath it all flows the faint aroma of cedar and myrrh, precious materials used to protect the most valuable texts from time and insects. But it's the sight that truly takes your breath away. Rising before you in terraced galleries are shelves upon shelves of texts, not the dozens you might have imagined, but thousands upon thousands of them, each containing wisdom copied from the great Mouseion's collection for Alexandria's citizens. Some papyri bear the marks of age, their surfaces darkened and edges carefully reinforced. Others gleam with recent copying, their writing crisp and dark, their surfaces clean and bright. Small tags dangle from many works, the silly boy that identify each by author, title, and subject. You watch as readers consult these tags, selecting texts with the practiced ease of people who have learned to navigate this ocean of learning. Readers move through this space with reverence, but not the intimidating formality you might have expected. Here, unlike the exclusive Mouseion, where only the greatest scholars of the age receive royal patronage, the Serapeum welcomes all who can read. Egyptian priests study alongside Greek merchants, Jewish students debate with Persian traders, and humble craftsmen's sons like yourself can aspire to touch the very documents that preserve humanity's greatest insights. You must be young Ketty, says a voice behind you, and you turn to see a man of perhaps 40 years approaching with the measured pace of someone accustomed to working with precious materials. This is Apollodoros, not the great Athenian scholar of the same name who serves in the royal Mouseion, but a skilled Egyptian-born scribe who supervises the copying work here in the Serapeum. His build speaks of a life spent hunched over scrolls rather than laboring in fields, and his hands, long and careful, bear the permanent stains of ink that mark someone who spends his days transferring knowledge from one surface to another. When he speaks, his voice carries the cultured accent of educated Alexandria, but with the warmth of someone who remembers his own humble beginnings. Your father Seneb has quite a reputation among those who work with papyrus, he says, switching easily between Egyptian and Greek as the conversation requires. They say his reeds are the finest processed in the Delta, and that his son shows promise with both pen and understanding. The question now is whether you're ready to move beyond preparing materials to preserving the words those materials exist to serve. You straighten your shoulders, feeling the weight of your father's expectations and your family's sacrifice. Master Apollodoros, I am ready to learn whatever skills you judge me capable of mastering. My father taught me to recognize quality papyrus by touch, to prepare surfaces for writing, to repair damaged sheets. I hope these abilities may serve the greater work done here. Apollodoros nods thoughtfully, but you sense he's evaluating more than just your words. His eyes take in your posture, your respectful manner, the quality of the simple tools your father provided, the way you hold yourself in this overwhelming environment. Skills with materials are essential, he replies, but here we do more than simply copy existing texts. We preserve understanding, organize it, sometimes correct errors that have crept in through generations of copying. We serve not just today's readers, but scholars yet unborn, who will depend on the accuracy of our work. Are you prepared for labor that demands both precision and comprehension? The question hangs in the air between you, loaded with implications about the kind of person you hope to become. This is the moment that will determine not just whether you're accepted as a copyist, but what kind of future you might build through dedication and skill. You think of your father's calloused hands, stained green-brown from years of processing papyrus stems, of your mother's patient weaving, creating the fine linen that protects precious texts, of the 3 years they saved, denying themselves small comforts so their son might have this chance to rise through learning rather than remain bound by the circumstances of his birth. Master, you say, your voice growing stronger with conviction, I am ready to serve wisdom however you direct me and to prove myself worthy of the trust you place in me. Apollodoros smiles then, the first truly warm expression you've seen from him, and you sense that you've passed some crucial test. Good, he says with genuine approval. Then let us begin with the most fundamental skill, how to handle a scroll without damaging it. For all the knowledge in the world becomes useless if we cannot preserve it safely for those who will seek it in years to come. The remainder of the morning passes in a gentle rhythm of instruction and discovery. Apollodoros leads you through the basic techniques that every copyist must master. How to unroll a scroll with both hands, one supporting the text being read while the other maintains proper tension on the already read portion. How to re-roll carefully, ensuring the papyrus lies flat and smooth to prevent the cracks that destroy ancient wisdom. How to identify different grades of papyrus by touch and appearance, from the finest sheets reserved for the most important works to the rougher grades used for practice and everyday copying. But beyond technical instruction, these first hours provide you with a sense of the rhythm and purpose that define this remarkable place. You observe other copyists at work, some transcribing texts with meticulous precision, others preparing materials, still others running errands between the Serapeum and other libraries throughout the city. You watch the easy collaboration between people from different backgrounds, united by their shared commitment to preserving human understanding, despite their different languages, customs, and beliefs. Among your fellow workers, you notice two who will become familiar figures in your daily routine. Baka, a boy about your own age whose father bakes bread for the temple staff, approaches his copying with the careful attention to consistency that good baking requires. His letters form with the same patient rhythm needed for perfect loaves, measured, reliable, never hurried. Demetrios, perhaps 5 years older and clearly more advanced in his training, moves between tasks with the confidence of someone who has mastered basic skills and begun to understand the larger purposes they serve. Apollodoros introduces you to these fellow copyists with words that reveal how diverse backgrounds can strengthen rather than threaten the common work. Young Ketty brings understanding of papyrus craft from his father's workshop. Baka knows the importance of consistency from his family's bakery. Demetrios has developed skill with both Egyptian and Greek scripts, making him valuable for translation work. Each of you contributes different strengths to serve our shared mission. As the morning progresses, you find yourself settling into the meditative state that comes from careful, repetitive work guided by clear purpose. The scratch of reed pens on papyrus, the soft whisper of scrolls being unrolled and re-rolled, the gentle murmur of readers discovering new insights. These sounds create an atmosphere unlike anything you've experienced, peaceful yet purposeful, contemplative yet engaged. You are copying a section of Hesiod's Works and Days, practicing the clear, even script that makes reading easier for future scholars. The Greek letters flow beneath your careful strokes, each one formed according to the standards Apollodoros demonstrated. As you work, the meaning of the text begins to emerge. Advice about honest labor, the proper times for planting and harvest, the value of wisdom gained through patient observation. The work you're copying, Apollodoros observes, pausing beside your table, comes from the great collection in the Mouseion itself. Zenodotus, the first librarian there, established the authoritative text that scholars across the Mediterranean now study. Here in the Serapeum, we ensure that such wisdom remains accessible not just to the royal scholars, but to anyone capable of benefiting from it. The words kindle something in your chest, not just pride in your careful copying, but awareness of how your small contribution serves purposes far larger than individual advancement. Every letter you form accurately preserves learning that might otherwise be lost. Every document you help maintain extends the life of insights that could benefit minds not yet born. Master, you venture during a pause in the work, do copyists here ever advance to serve in the great Mouseion itself? Apollodoros considers the question carefully before answering. The Mouseion admits only the most distinguished scholars, mathematicians like Eratosthenes who can calculate the Earth's circumference, grammarians like Aristophanes who establish the authoritative versions of Homer, astronomers who map the movements of stars. But excellence in any field draws attention. A copyist who masters Egyptian, Greek, and perhaps Hebrew scripts, who understands not just how to reproduce texts, but how to organize and preserve them, who demonstrates both skill and dedication over many years. Such a person might indeed find opportunities beyond these walls. The possibility settles into your mind not as wild fantasy, but as distant goal, something to work toward through years of patient service and growing competence. You return to your copying with renewed focus, each letter not just practice, but preparation for whatever future your dedication might earn. As afternoon light slants through the high windows, painting moving patterns on your papyrus, you become aware of how completely your life has changed in the space of a single morning. The boy who woke in his father's chamber now sits surrounded by the wisdom of ages, his hands learning to preserve insights that span cultures and centuries. You are no longer simply Ketty, son of Seneb the papyrus craftsman. You are Ketty, copyist in the great library system of Alexandria, apprentice, guardian of human learning. This transformation carries both profound responsibility and unlimited possibility. Outside, Alexandria continues its daily rhythm. Merchants trading goods from across the Mediterranean, scholars debating in the schools, ships arriving with treasures and knowledge from distant lands. But here in the Serapeum, time moves differently, measured not by the sun's passage, but by the patient accumulation of preserved wisdom. Your reed pen moves steadily across the papyrus, copying words that will outlive empires, preserving insights that will guide minds in ages yet to come. The morning that began with nervous uncertainty has become an afternoon of growing confidence and deepening purpose. This is your calling. This is your beginning. This is where everything changes. But more than that, you sense this is also preparation for something greater. The dream Apollodoros mentioned, of someday earning a place among the legendary scholars of the Mouseion itself, no longer seems impossible. Distant, yes, requiring years of dedication and exceptional skill, but not impossible. The afternoon work continues, and with each careful stroke of your pen, you take another small step toward that distant but beckoning future. The weeks that follow your first day at the Serapeum settle into a rhythm as comforting and predictable as the Nile's annual flood. Each morning, as Ra's first light filters through the high windows of the temple's copying chamber, you take your place at the preparation table alongside the other copyists, your hands learning the sacred rituals that transform simple materials into tools of preservation. Today, as every day, you begin with the most fundamental skill, preparing your reed pen for the day's work. The morning air carries the familiar perfume of scholarly labor, the dry sweetness of papyrus, the sharp tang of fresh ink, and the warm scent of oil lamps that supplement the growing daylight streaming through the temple's clerestory windows. Apollodoros moves between the tables like a patient teacher, observing each copyist's technique with the practiced eye of someone who has spent 20 years perfecting these same skills. "Feel the reed's nature," he murmurs as he pauses behind your workspace, his voice carrying both instruction and encouragement. Each stem from the delta marshes brings different qualities. Some hold firmness for detailed work. Others offer flexibility better suited for flowing scripts. Your fingers test the reed you've selected from the morning supply, not too thick, not too thin, with the perfect balance of strength and pliability that you've learned to recognize by touch. The small bronze knife in your other hand gleams with the careful sharpening Baka taught you last week, its edge precise enough to make the delicate cuts that determine your pen's character. The first cut requires steady hands and clear purpose, a diagonal slice that creates the pen's basic tip. Too steep and the point becomes fragile, breaking after only a few strokes. Too shallow and it won't hold enough ink for smooth writing. Your blade moves with growing confidence, guided by weeks of practice and the patient corrections of your supervisor. "Better each day," Apollodoros notes approvingly as you test the initial cut against a practice shard. Now the channel, remember, this controls how the ink flows from reed to papyrus. The second cut demands even greater precision. This creates the slit that allows ink to travel from the hollow interior of the reed to its writing tip. Too long, and ink floods the writing surface, creating blots that ruin hours of careful work. Too short, and the flow becomes irregular, leaving gaps that mar both beauty and legibility. As you work, the gentle percussion of productivity surrounds you. At the next table, Demetrios grinds pigments with the steady, circular motion that has become second nature after 5 years of service. The marble pestle against the grinding bowl creates a soft, hypnotic rhythm, not quite musical but soothing in its consistency. Bakha, now in his 3rd month, mixes inks with the careful attention to proportion that his family's baking taught him to value. Now the chewing, Apollodoros instructs, and you place the reed tip between your teeth, working it gently until the fibers separate into the brush-like point that Egyptian scribes have used for over 1,000 years. This delicate process cannot be rushed. Too much pressure destroys the tip entirely. Too little leaves it stiff and unresponsive to the subtle pressures that create beautiful script. The taste of the reed is clean and slightly bitter, carrying the faint mineral tang of Nile water that nourished its growth in the sacred marshes. As you work the fibers with careful precision, you think of the wetlands where these reeds flourished, vast expanses where the great river spreads and slows, creating perfect conditions for the plants that make all writing possible. Test it now, Apollodoros says, offering a small piece of practice papyrus and a palette where black ink waits, already mixed to proper consistency. You dip your pen carefully, feeling how the ink flows into the hollow channel, watching as the brush-like tip holds exactly the right amount of fluid. When you touch it to the papyrus, the ink flows smoothly and evenly, creating a line that speaks of growing mastery over your tools. Good, Apollodoros says, and genuine approval warms his voice. You're learning that the pen becomes an extension of thought itself. When properly prepared, it translates the movement of your mind directly onto the writing surface without interference or hesitation. The morning progresses into focused copying work, and you settle into the meditative state that transforms mere labor into something approaching worship. Today's assignment continues your work with Hesiod's Works and Days, the text Zenodotus himself edited in the great Mouseion, now available here in the Serapeum for students like yourself to study and preserve. Your pen moves across the papyrus with increasing fluency, forming the Greek letters that spell out ancient wisdom about honest work, proper seasons for planting, and the value of patient observation. Each word emerges clearly under your careful strokes, contributing to a copy that future readers will find both accurate and beautiful. In copying these verses, Apollodoros observes quietly as he reviews your morning's progress. You preserve more than words. You maintain the wisdom that guides farmers in their planting, merchants in their trading, and young people in understanding how honest labor serves both personal growth and community prosperity. The afternoon brings a different kind of assignment, one that reveals the true scope of what the Serapeum contains. Apollodoros approaches your station carrying 2 scrolls whose differences immediately capture your attention, not through their age or condition, but through the distinct atmosphere each seems to carry. The first bears the familiar Syllabos tag, marking it as Egyptian religious literature, a collection of hymns to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, copied from temple archives that preserve traditions stretching back to the pyramid builders. The second displays the crisp organization typical of Greek philosophical works, a section from Plato's Republic, one of the most popular texts that has become a literary classic in Alexandria's collections. Today you will discover, Apollodoros says thoughtfully, that preservation requires wisdom as well as skill. Not all texts speak in the same voice, yet each deserves copying that honors its particular nature and purpose. He unrolls the Egyptian hymnal first, and you immediately recognize the flowing beauty of hieratic script, the cursive writing system that Egyptian priests have used for religious and scholarly works since the time of the ancient pharaohs. The papyrus bears the rich, earthy scent of temple incense, and its margins display protective symbols that speak of sacred purposes. This represents the wisdom of your ancestors, Apollodoros explains with the reverence he reserves for the most precious texts. Hymns that have guided Egyptian understanding of divine wisdom for over 1,000 years. Sacred knowledge passed down through temple scribes whose hands once touched the very papyrus you're preparing to copy. Tauntanadadak decoupled of livering subject white to telling these You lean forward to examine the text more closely, recognizing some hieratic symbols from the religious vocabulary your father taught you during childhood visits to local temples. The content speaks of Thoth's role in maintaining cosmic order, of the sacred responsibility that comes with literacy, of writing as a divine gift that enables human minds to preserve and share understanding across generations. Copy the opening section carefully, Apollodoros instructs. Feel the weight of tradition in each stroke. This wisdom guided scribes when the Great Pyramid still gleamed with polished limestone. As you begin the careful work of reproducing the ancient script, you find yourself falling into the reverent rhythm that such texts demand. Each hieratic symbol carries not just meaning but sanctity, the accumulated reverence of countless Egyptian scribes who saw writing as a sacred art, a partnership between human skill and divine inspiration. The work feels like participation in an eternal ritual. Your reed pen follows the flowing curves of the script, each symbol linking you to the long chain of scribes who have preserved this wisdom across the centuries. You sense connection to something larger than individual achievement. The eternal Egyptian tradition of maintaining knowledge through patient devotion and respect for divine order. But then Apollodoros unrolls the second scroll, and the atmosphere shifts completely. This, he says, his voice taking on a different quality, more analytical, less ceremonial, represents a different approach to understanding the world around us. Greek philosophical inquiry, based not on inherited tradition but on systematic questioning and logical analysis. You glance at the text and feel your breath catch. The Greek words march across the papyrus with logical precision, each argument building methodically upon the previous one. But the content challenges assumptions you've never thought to question. Where Egyptian wisdom speaks of divine order as something to be revered and preserved, Plato's dialogue treats knowledge as something to be examined through reasoned discussion, tested through careful argument between minds seeking truth together. This wisdom comes, Apollodoros continues, not from temple tradition, but from minds willing to question inherited assumptions, from scholars who believe that truth emerges through investigation rather than preservation of ancient authority. The contrast strikes you with unexpected force. The Egyptian text you've been copying speaks of Thoth as the source of all wisdom, describing scribes as faithful servants who preserve divine knowledge without alteration. The Greek text presents Socrates questioning inherited beliefs through dialogue, arguing that wisdom emerges when minds engage honestly with difficult questions rather than simply accepting traditional answers. But master, you venture hesitantly, if these approaches contradict each other, which represents genuine wisdom? Apollodoros's smile carries a complexity that reveals years of wrestling with exactly this question. That, young Ketty, defines the great challenge of working here in Alexandria. Do we preserve only knowledge that agrees with our inherited traditions? Or do we copy all forms of wisdom, even when they challenge what we thought we knew? Around you, other copyists work at their own assignments, but you notice how the atmosphere has grown more thoughtful. Bacca, copying at the next table, keeps his eyes focused strictly on his own work, a collection of mathematical exercises that avoids both religious and philosophical complexity. Demetrios, more experienced and therefore trusted with more challenging material, works on what appears to be a medical text that bridges Egyptian anatomical knowledge with Greek systematic observation. Begin copying the philosophical text, Apollodoros instructs. Work slowly, carefully. Let your hands preserve the words even as your mind considers their implications. As you begin to copy the Greek text, the rhythm feels completely different from the Egyptian hymnal. Where hieratic script flowed with ceremonial grace, Plato's dialogue advances through questions and responses, each exchange designed to reveal truth through the meeting of minds, rather than appeal to traditional authority. Your pen moves more deliberately now, not from lack of skill, but from the intellectual weight of what you're preserving. What is justice? Can virtue be taught? How should we understand the relationship between knowledge and goodness? Each question opens pathways of thought that seemed unimaginable only hours ago. Yet, as you copy, you begin to sense something unexpected. Not contradiction between the approaches, but different methods serving the same fundamental purpose, helping human minds understand reality more completely. How do you feel copying these different approaches to wisdom? Apollodoros asks, quietly during a pause in the work. You consider the question honestly, your pen resting on the papyrus as you process both texts. Confused, master, but also curious. Both traditions seek truth, but through different paths. The Egyptian text honors wisdom as divine gift. The Greek text treats wisdom as human achievement. Perhaps, Apollodoros encourages, perhaps the question isn't which tradition is correct, but how both can serve the larger goal of understanding. Apollodoros nods approvingly. Exactly the insight that makes Alexandria unique among all cities. Here we preserve not just Egyptian wisdom or Greek philosophy, but both, trusting that minds capable of studying all approaches to truth will discover insights that no single tradition could achieve alone. As the afternoon light begins to soften, you find yourself in one of the quieter reading areas of the Serapeum, delivering completed copying assignments to the storage chambers where Apollodoros has sent you. The corridors here are lined with alcoves containing texts in multiple scripts, Egyptian hieratic, Greek uncials, and writing systems from lands whose names you're only beginning to learn. It's here, in this forest of human learning, that you encounter Miriam. She sits at a small table tucked between towering shelves surrounded by scrolls written in 3 different scripts. Before her lies a text in Hebrew, its right-to-left script flowing like a river of meaning you cannot read. Beside it, a Greek translation in progress, the familiar letters marching left to right across papyrus that shows the careful preparation you've learned to recognize as finest quality. And nearby, reference works in Egyptian hieratic. Apparently, she consults all 3 traditions to ensure accuracy in her translation work. She appears to be, perhaps, 25 years old, with the kind of focused concentration that speaks of someone who has spent years navigating between different worlds of knowledge. Her hair is covered in the manner of Jewish women, but her clothing shows the practical simplicity of someone who spends her days working with scrolls and ink rather than managing a household. When she looks up at your approach, her eyes hold a warmth that immediately sets you at ease, but also a depth that suggests she has wrestled with questions not unlike those troubling your own mind. "You must be Ketty," she says in accented but fluent Egyptian. Apollodoros mentioned that his newest copyist comes from the papyrus craftsman. I've been curious to meet someone who understands our writing materials from their very origins. You incline your head respectfully, uncertain of the proper etiquette for addressing a scholar who is clearly important, but whose exact status in the library hierarchy you don't understand. I am honored to meet you, Miriam, though I fear my understanding of papyrus is simple compared to the knowledge you work with here. She laughs, a sound that holds genuine amusement rather than mockery.
Please, just Miriam, and don't underestimate the importance of understanding materials. Half the errors in translation come from copyists who don't recognize when poor papyrus has caused letters to blur or fade, leading them to guess at meanings that were once clear.
As she speaks, she gestures to the scrolls around her, and you notice that her hands, like Apollodoros's, bear the permanent stains of ink, the marks of someone who spends her life transferring knowledge from one form to another. What are you translating, you ask, curiosity overcoming nervousness about interrupting important work. Portions of the Septuagint, she replies, indicating the Hebrew scroll. From Hebrew into Greek, refining the translation of our sacred writings for Jewish families here in Alexandria who have grown more comfortable with Greek than with the language of their ancestors. It's part of the great project that began under the previous kings, making the wisdom of our people accessible to those who have been shaped by Greek learning while ensuring they don't lose touch with their deeper heritage. She pauses, studying your face to see if you understand the complexity of what she's describing. Tell me, young Ketty, in your family's work with papyrus, do you ever have to adapt your techniques when working with reeds from different parts of the marshes? The question surprises you, but you answer honestly. Yes, Miriam. Reeds from different areas of the delta have different qualities. Some are better for fine work, others for everyday copying. The skill lies in recognizing what each type of reed can do best and matching your technique to its nature. Exactly, Miriam says with approval. Translation work follows similar principles. Hebrew thinks in one way, Greek in another, Egyptian in yet another. Each language has its own nature, its own strengths. The art isn't forcing one language to become identical to another, but finding how each can express the same truth most clearly. She unrolls a section of her Hebrew text, pointing to a passage you cannot read, but whose importance she clearly wants to share. This passage speaks of the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom, but also emphasizes that understanding comes through patient study and righteous living. Beautiful insight, but how do you capture in Greek the way Hebrew balances divine reverence with human responsibility for learning? You watch as she consults her Greek version, her brow furrowed with concentration. Greek wants to analyze, to distinguish precisely between different concepts. Hebrew often prefers to suggest, to create images that speak to heart and mind together. Finding the bridge between them, that's the real work. It sounds challenging, you venture. Challenging, yes, but also essential. Miriam's voice takes on a quality that reminds you of the way Apollodoros speaks about preserving medical knowledge. Here in Alexandria, we Jews have learned Greek ways, studied Greek philosophy, participated in Greek cultural life. But we cannot allow that participation to cost us our own wisdom. So we translate, preserve, build bridges between worlds. She glances at the scrolls you're carrying, the assignments you've been copying under Apollodoros's guidance. I imagine you facing similar challenges in your own studies, learning to work with Greek texts while remaining true to Egyptian understanding. The observations strike so close to your recent struggles with Egyptian and Greek approaches to wisdom that you feel momentarily exposed, as if she has somehow read your thoughts. How did you know? Because, Miriam says gently, every scholar in this place faces the same challenge eventually. Alexandria brings together the knowledge of all peoples, but that knowledge doesn't always agree with itself. Egyptian medicine and Greek medicine, Jewish law and Greek philosophy, Persian astronomy and Egyptian star lore. The question each of us must answer is, what do we do when different traditions offer different insights into truth? What answer have you found, you ask, genuinely curious about how someone more experienced has navigated these waters? Miriam sets down her reed pen and considers her response carefully. I've learned that truth is like the light that fills this chamber. When sunlight passes through the colored glass in our windows, it separates into many different hues. Each color is real, each is beautiful, but none contains the complete light by itself. She gestures to the scrolls surrounding her work area. Egyptian wisdom, Greek philosophy, Hebrew scripture, each shows us part of divine truth. The error lies not in learning from all of them, but in thinking that any single tradition contains everything we need to know. But what about those who say we should preserve only our own traditions? That foreign knowledge corrupts rather than enriches? Ah, Miriam says with a knowing smile. You've been talking to traditionalists who fear that learning threatens faith. They serve an important purpose. Without them, the distinctive wisdom of each people would be lost in a general mixture. But they sometimes forget that the God who gave wisdom to our ancestors also gave minds capable of recognizing wisdom wherever it appears. As the oil lamps begin to be lit throughout the library and afternoon transitions toward evening, Miriam begins organizing her scrolls for the next day's work. But before you leave, she offers one more observation that will echo in your mind for years to come. Remember, young Ketty, the work we do here isn't just about preserving knowledge for ourselves. We preserve it for people not yet born, in places not yet founded, facing challenges we cannot imagine. When you copy those texts that challenge comfortable assumptions or preserve insights that come from foreign traditions, you're not betraying your heritage. You're ensuring that future generations will have access to all the wisdom humanity has discovered, so they can choose what serves them best. The next morning brings an assignment unlike any you've yet received, one that will take you beyond the familiar halls of the Serapeum to deliver completed translations to the great Mouseion itself. Apollodoros explains that certain texts, particularly those involving cross-cultural scholarly work, must be reviewed by the master librarians before being added to the permanent collection. Today you will see, Apollodoros says as he prepares a carefully wrapped bundle of scrolls, how knowledge flows between different kinds of guardians. The Serapeum preserves learning for students and citizens. The Mouseion advances understanding through original research. Both serve the same goal, ensuring that human wisdom survives and grows for future generations. The cart that will carry you across Alexandria is sturdy but unadorned, its wooden wheels bound with iron, its bed lined with soft wool to protect the precious texts you're transporting. The driver, a middle-aged Egyptian named Khnum, greets you with the easy familiarity of someone who has made this journey countless times. Another young copyist, learning the roads between libraries.
He observes, approvingly.
Good. The more people who understand how knowledge moves through the city, the safer that knowledge becomes. As the cart begins to move, settling into the gentle rhythm that will carry you through Alexandria's bustling heart, you find yourself entering a different state of awareness, alert enough to observe and learn, but relaxed enough to let the motion work its subtle influence on your thoughts and perceptions. The route from the Serapeum to the Mouseion takes you through quarters of the city you've only glimpsed before, but at a pace that allows you to truly observe rather than simply pass through. Where your nervous first-day journey showed you fragments of Alexandria's diversity, this slower passage reveals the deeper currents of Alexandrian life. The first district you traverse houses Egyptian craft workers whose skills serve the entire library system. Here, papyrus makers prepare writing surfaces according to specifications that haven't changed since the pharaoh's time. Linen weavers create the protective wrappings that guard precious texts from insects and moisture. Reed cutters select and prepare the stems that become writing implements in skilled hands. These crafts, Khnum observes, noting your interest, are what make all scholarship possible. Without good papyrus, careful ink, and proper storage materials, even the greatest wisdom becomes vulnerable to time and chance. The cart wheels find their rhythm on the well-maintained streets, creating a percussion that matches the beating of your heart. Clip-clop, roll-roll, clip-clop, roll-roll. The sound becomes hypnotic, allowing your mind to drift between observation and reflection, as the city moves past you like scenes from a living scroll. As you enter the Greek Quarter, the atmosphere shifts noticeably. Here, the architecture becomes more elaborate, the conversations more philosophical. You pass a small outdoor school where a bearded teacher discusses questions of ethics with a circle of young men, their animated gestures revealing the Greek love of intellectual debate. This, too, serves Alexandria's character, the constant examination of ideas through reasoned. Greeks, Khnum says, with affectionate amusement, never met a question they couldn't discuss for half a day. But give them credit. Some of their discussions turn into discoveries that change how we understand the world. The rhythm of travel creates space for deeper thinking. As the cart rocks gently on its springs, you find yourself processing the complexities you've encountered in recent weeks, the medical texts that challenge inherited assumptions, the translation work that bridges different cultural approaches to truth, the careful way scholars select assignments, ensuring that students grow ready for each new level of complexity. Gradually, the residential sounds give way to more formal ones as you approach the palace quarter. Here, the streets become wider, the buildings more monumental, the atmosphere more ceremonial. The Mouseion complex rises before you like a vision of human ambition made stone. Massive columns supporting elaborate pediments, but integrated with gardens that speak to the harmony between intellectual pursuit and natural beauty. There, Khnum says as he guides the cart toward the Mouseion service entrance, is where the greatest minds of our age gather to push the boundaries of human understanding. Inside those halls, Eratosthenes calculates the size of the earth itself. Aristophanes establishes authoritative versions of Homer that will guide readers for centuries. Aristarchus develops new methods for analyzing and preserving ancient texts. As you help unload the scrolls, carrying them with the careful attention these precious items require, you notice that the atmosphere here feels different from the Serapeum. Where the daughter library pulses with the energy of learning and preservation, the Mouseion carries a more rarefied quality. The sense of knowledge being not just maintained, but advanced through original investigation. The scholar who receives your delivery is perhaps 40 years old, his Greek clothing marking him as one of the international researchers who come to Alexandria from across the Mediterranean world. But when he speaks, his words reveal a mind that has learned to appreciate wisdom regardless of its cultural origins. Ah, the cross-cultural studies from the Serapeum, he says, examining the scrolls you've brought. Excellent. The translation work being done there helps us understand how different traditions approach the same fundamental questions. Egyptian astronomical observations, Greek mathematical methods, Hebrew ethical insights all contribute to our larger understanding of truth. He pauses, studying you with eyes that seem to evaluate your potential for growth and contribution. Young copyist, you are witnessing something unprecedented in human history, the gathering of all wisdom traditions in one place for comparison and synthesis. Some call this dangerous mixing of foreign ideas. I call it the necessary work of minds seeking truth wherever it can be found. The return journey to the Serapeum takes place in the golden light of late afternoon, when Alexandria seems to glow with the accumulated warmth of the day and the promise of evening's peaceful approach. As Khnum guides the cart through the city's familiar streets, you find yourself in a contemplative state that feels like the natural conclusion to a day of significant discovery. The rhythm of travel has worked its quiet transformation, matching the beating of your heart and the cadence of your breathing until consciousness begins to soften around the edges. The sounds of the city, voices calling in multiple languages, cartwheels on stone, the distant music of temple ceremonies, blend into a symphony that speaks of human diversity unified by common purpose. Tell me, young scholar, Khnum says as the cart rocks gently on its springs, what have you learned today about the way knowledge moves through our city? You consider the question as the late afternoon light slants through palm fronds, creating moving patterns of shadow and illumination. I've learned that wisdom doesn't belong to any single people or tradition. Egyptian understanding, Greek investigation, Hebrew insight. They all flow together here like tributaries joining the Nile. Good, Khnum nods approvingly. And what does that tell you about your work as a copyist? The answer emerges with the clarity that sometimes comes when the mind relaxes and the heart opens. That preserving knowledge isn't just about copying texts accurately. It's about connecting worlds, helping different kinds of wisdom speak to each other. As the cart approaches the familiar precincts of the Serapeum, you see the temple library complex with new understanding. No longer does it seem like merely a storage place for copied texts. Instead, it appears as what it truly is, a bridge between the highest scholarly research and the practical needs of Alexandria's diverse population, a place where all human wisdom becomes accessible to minds ready to receive it. The oil lamps are being lit in the reading chambers as evening approaches, their warm glow supplementing the fading natural light that has guided the day's careful work. You think of Miriam, probably still wrestling with Hebrew and Greek translations, of Apollodoros, reviewing the day's copying and planning tomorrow's assignments to guide your continuing education, of the countless other guardians of knowledge who have dedicated their lives to ensuring that human understanding survives and grows. Apollodoros tells me you've been asking important questions, Khnum observes as he guides the cart to its final stop. Questions about whether preserving foreign knowledge means betraying Egyptian traditions. You nod, surprised that word of your struggles has reached even the drivers who serve the libraries. Let me tell you something, young Ketty, Khnum says, securing the reins and turning to face you directly. I've carried scholars between these libraries for 15 years. I've transported Egyptian priests to consult Greek mathematical texts. I've delivered Greek philosophers studying Egyptian wisdom. I've moved Hebrew scrolls to be translated by scholars who speak 6 languages. He pauses, his weathered face serious, but kind. In all that time, I've never met an Egyptian who became less Egyptian by learning Greek wisdom, or a Greek who became less Greek by studying Egyptian knowledge. What I have seen is people becoming larger, more complete, better able to serve truth wherever they find it. As consciousness continues to soften and the familiar sounds of the Serapeum welcome you back to the world you're learning to call home, you find yourself filled not with the confusion that has troubled you for weeks, but with a growing sense of clarity and purpose. The choice that once seemed so difficult between Egyptian loyalty and universal truth-seeking begins to resolve into something simpler and more profound. You don't have to choose between honoring your heritage and serving broader knowledge. Instead, you can use your heritage as a foundation for serving knowledge more completely. Your hands, trained by your father's patient instruction in the nature of papyrus, can serve the preservation of all wisdom. Your mind, shaped by Egyptian respect for written knowledge, can remain open to truth wherever it appears. Your heart, rooted in the love that motivated your family's sacrifice, can expand to embrace humanity's entire quest for understanding. The afternoon work continues to echo in your mind as consciousness prepares for the deeper rest that comes after significant growth. You sense that today's journey between libraries represents more than simple transportation. It marks a stage in your own development from nervous beginner to someone who understands the larger purposes served by patient, careful work. Tonight, you suspect, your dreams will be different, deeper, more integrated. Tonight, the path forward will become clearer. The cartwheels continue their gentle rhythm along the palm-lined roads that connect Alexandria to its outlying districts. The afternoon sun warms your face as Khnum, the weathered Egyptian driver who has served the library for 20 years, carrying learned men and precious texts between the city and its satellite collections, guides the cart back toward the great Mouseion. But something shifts in the quality of light around you, in the very texture of reality itself. The questions that have troubled you for weeks begin to dissolve into something larger. Priest Kamwaset's warnings about foreign corruption, Miriam's wisdom about cultural bridges, your father's sacrifice enabling your service to Greek masters, all of it starts to merge into deeper understanding that exists beyond ordinary thought. The cart continues its journey through familiar countryside, but you sense that you travel not just through the physical landscape of Egypt, but through layers of time itself. Every temple and workshop, every canal and field carries stories of wisdom passed between generations, between cultures, between seekers of truth. As the ordinary world begins to shimmer and transform around you, something extraordinary starts to happen. You find yourself drifting through the royal quarter of Alexandria, moving unseen through the marble corridors of the palace where people who have never touched a scroll or mixed ink with their own hands make decisions that affect your world. In the throne room, Ptolemy VIII sits surrounded by advisors whose loyalties shift like desert sand. The king himself embodies paranoia. 20 years of civil war with his brother Ptolemy VI have taught him to see enemies everywhere. Battles scarred his face, fought not just on distant fields, but in the very halls of this palace, where poison and daggers settle more disputes than swords. "The library costs us 12 talents monthly," his treasurer reports, scrolls covering a table that once held maps of conquests, but now displays only debts. The intellectuals consume resources that could outfit 3 regiments. Meanwhile, Rhodes offers sanctuary to our enemies, and their agents move freely through the Mouseion under the pretense of research. The king's chief minister, a narrow-faced man named Dionysios, leans forward with the intensity of someone who has built his career on finding threats.
"Your Majesty, yesterday alone we intercepted 7 letters from the library to foreign courts, mathematical treatises to Syracuse, medical text to Pergamon, astronomical data to Rhodes. How do we distinguish these from coded intelligence?"
Through the palace windows, you can see smoke rising from the harbor district, where angry crowds gather. The people of Alexandria understand that their prosperity depends on the library's reputation, drawing researchers, students, and wealthy patrons from across the Mediterranean. But they also fear the king's wrath if they openly oppose his suspicions about foreign influence. In another chamber, Egyptian priests from the ancient temples meet in secret session. High Priest Khemwaset speaks with barely controlled anger. 3,000 years of Egyptian wisdom, and now we must compete with Greek boys who arrived yesterday, claiming to understand our own medical traditions better than we do. The king fears foreign spies, but the real invasion happened generations ago when we allowed strangers to become the interpreters of our own heritage. An older priest, his shaved head marked with ritual scars, responds with the weariness of someone who has watched empires rise and fall. The Greeks preserve our understanding, yes, but in their language, according to their methods. When Egyptian medicine flows through Greek categories, does it remain Egyptian? When our star observations serve Greek mathematical theories, do we remain the teachers or have we become the taught? The royal reality behind tonight's crisis becomes clear. This transcends simple court paranoia or academic independence. This concerns cultural survival in an age when governmental power and intellectual authority no longer flow from the same source. The Ptolemies rule Egypt, but they are Greeks. The researchers study Egyptian wisdom, but they transform it through foreign methods. The priests maintain ancient traditions, but they watch their influence diminish with each generation. In the economic quarter, you observe merchant families counting the cost of court instability. If the learned men flee to Rhodes or Pergamon, a silk trader explains to his sons, who will buy our papyrus? Who will commission our finest scribes? The library brings more gold to Alexandria than any 3 trading ventures combined. But his neighbor, a grain merchant with ties to rural Egypt, disagrees. Let them go. We fed ourselves before the Greeks came, and will prosper after they leave. Egypt's wealth flows from the Nile, not from foreign books. No. Now you move through Alexandria's commercial heart, where the true cost of tonight's crisis becomes clear. The library serves not just as a center of learning, it drives the city's prosperity as an economic engine, and its researchers prove as valuable as silk or spices. In the banking quarter, you observe a meeting between Alexandrian financiers and Roman grain merchants. The intellectuals bring gold, explains Demetrios the banker, his fingers moving across an abacus that calculates in talents and drachmas. Every foreign student pays fees. Every visiting researcher purchases supplies. Every completed project attracts new patrons. Last year alone, the library generated revenue equivalent to 3 major shipping ventures. But the Romans see different possibilities. What concerns us, says Marcus Crassus's representative, involves not the gold they bring, but the understanding they might take. Military engineering, siegecraft, naval architecture, all studied openly here and shared freely with any kingdom that requests it. Rhodes builds ships using techniques learned in Alexandria. Pergamon designs fortifications based on mathematical principles developed in your Mouseion. Through the harbor district, you observe the human cost of court paranoia. Families pack belongings with desperate haste as foreign intellectuals prepare for exile. A mathematician from Babylon weeps as he abandons 15 years of astronomical observations. Calculations too bulky to carry, too valuable to abandon, too dangerous to possess once the king's suspicions focus on him. In the Jewish quarter, Elder Samuel, a learned priest from a family that traces its lineage to the temple in Jerusalem, meets with community leaders around tables laden with scrolls that represent centuries of careful translation work. If the Septuagint project fails, he says gravely, Hebrew wisdom remains locked in Hebrew words. Our insights serve only our own children, but if we continue despite official hostility, we risk being branded as conspirators against Egyptian tradition. The economic foundation supporting scholarship proves more intricate than you had imagined. Wealthy families from across the Mediterranean fund research projects not from pure love of learning, but because understanding translates into practical advantage. A patron who sponsors medical research gains access to treatments that could save his family's lives. A king who supports astronomical studies obtains navigation techniques that enhance his fleet's effectiveness. But this same foundation makes intellectuals vulnerable to court pressure. When Ptolemy VIII suspects foreign influence, he can strangle the library's income by restricting access to its most valuable resources. When Roman merchants worry about strategic understanding reaching enemy hands, they can pressure the king to limit which texts reach which researchers. You see how tonight's safeguarding efforts serve not just academic ideals but economic survival. Hidden archives ensure that Alexandria retains its intellectual assets even when court currents make open scholarship impossible. Secret copying techniques maintain the city's reputation as a center of learning even when official policies drive away foreign researchers. In the workshops where scribes, bookbinders, and papyrus makers earn their daily bread, families discuss what the crisis means for their livelihoods. Without foreign intellectuals, a papyrus maker explains to his apprentice, who will buy our finest grades? Egyptian priests use cheaper materials. Local students cannot afford premium quality. Our craft depends on customers who value learning enough to pay for its proper care. The protection of learning becomes an act of economic defiance as much as intellectual courage. By maintaining Alexandria's academic resources despite court opposition, the safeguarding efforts protect not just abstract understanding, but the practical prosperity of thousands of families whose skills serve the community of learning. Your consciousness drifts across the Mediterranean, where the crisis in Alexandria reverberates through royal courts and merchant houses from Spain to Syria. Tonight's protection efforts serve not just local needs, but a complex web of international relationships that few in Alexandria fully understand. In the palace of Pergamon, King Attalus III reads reports from his spies in Alexandria with keen interest. If Ptolemy drives out the intellectuals, he tells his advisors, we must prepare to welcome them. Our own library could surpass Alexandria's within a decade if we acquire their best minds along with their accumulated understanding. Pergamon's agents already move through Alexandria's academic community, quietly offering sanctuary to researchers whose loyalty to Ptolemy has become questionable. On the island of Rhodes, the governing council debates whether to risk Ptolemaic anger by sheltering exiled Alexandrian intellectuals. The navigation techniques they possess, argues Admiral Nicias, could give our merchant fleet decisive advantages over Carthaginian and Roman competitors. But if we anger Egypt, our grain supplies become vulnerable to royal retribution. The Rhodians face the same dilemma that troubles kings across the eastern Mediterranean. Does the understanding justify the court risk? In Syrian Antioch, Seleucid officials calculate how Alexandria's intellectual crisis might serve their own ambitions. The Ptolemies grow weaker with each purge, observes the court astronomer himself, a refugee from earlier Alexandrian court politics. Every researcher they exile potentially serves our interests. Military engineering, siegecraft, metallurgy, all the understanding that once made Egypt formidable could flow northward to us. The Roman perspective emerges through conversations in taverns frequented by Italian merchants. Let the Egyptians destroy their own advantages, laughs a grain trader from Puteoli. Every intellectual they drive away weakens their position relative to Rome. We benefit whether they flee to us or to our competitors. Either way, Egypt loses academic resources it cannot easily replace. But in Athens, the philosophical schools observe the crisis with profound concern. Alexandria represents something unprecedented, explains the head of the academy to his gathered students. For the first time in human history, learned men from all traditions work together in one place. If court paranoia destroys this synthesis, it may never be recreated. Each tradition will retreat into isolation, and the advancement of understanding will slow to the pace of individual cultures rather than the accelerated progress possible through collaboration. Jewish communities across the diaspora follow developments in Alexandria with particular anxiety. The Septuagint translation project, if completed, will make Hebrew scripture accessible to minds that could never read the original language. But if the project fails due to court pressure, Jewish wisdom remains locked within Jewish communities, unable to influence the broader currents of Mediterranean thought. Through merchant connections that span from Gades to Babylon, news spreads of Alexandria's internal tensions. Families that have built their prosperity on trade with the library's international community begin hedging their investments, seeking new partnerships that might survive court upheaval. The economic consequences of academic exile ripple outward through commercial relationships that connect every major port in the ancient world. Understanding emerges that tonight's secret protection efforts serve not just Alexandria, but the entire Mediterranean world's intellectual future. Hidden archives protect wisdom that belongs to no single kingdom, but to the shared heritage of all civilizations that border the Great Sea. The copying techniques ensure that insights discovered through international collaboration remain available even when court authorities try to restrict academic exchange. Your role in protecting manuscripts becomes part of a larger defense of the principle that understanding serves humanity rather than particular royal interests. The boy who once worried about betraying Egyptian tradition by serving Greek learning now understands that true loyalty requires defending the synthesis of all traditions against the narrow nationalism that would impoverish everyone. Consciousness settles gently back into the cart. But everything has changed. The palm trees no longer seem like simple vegetation. They appear as living symbols of how deep roots enable reaching toward light. Your father's patient instruction in selecting the finest papyrus reeds now reveals its deeper purpose, preparing you to serve as guardian of wisdom that will benefit minds across all cultures and centuries. The Nile, visible in the distance, flows with new meaning. Like the understanding you're called to preserve, it carries life from source to sea, nourishing every field it touches without diminishing its essential nature. Egyptian civilization flourished because the sacred river brought fertility from distant lands. Now, Egyptian wisdom will flourish by flowing through Greek methods to reach distant minds. Khnum's gentle humming, the rhythmic motion of cartwheels, even the afternoon heat, everything speaks of natural processes that transform individual elements into something greater than any could achieve alone. The anxiety that troubled your heart for weeks dissolves like morning mist before the warming sun. You understand now that priest Kamwasiet's concerns and Apollodoros's enthusiasm both serve the same sacred purpose, protecting and extending human access to divine truth. The priest guards against losing precious traditions. The researcher works to expand understanding beyond traditional boundaries, Both impulses honor the same source, though they emphasize different aspects of faithful stewardship. Your parents' sacrifice finds its true fulfillment not in choosing Egyptian wisdom over Greek, but in developing the skills needed to serve all learning with Egyptian standards of reverence and precision. The 3 years they saved, your father's careful training, your mother's daily prayers, all prepared you for work that transcends cultural boundaries while honoring the best of your heritage. The scrolls waiting in your copying chamber no longer seem like foreign intrusions into Egyptian wisdom. They reveal themselves as the natural flowering of seeds planted by Egyptian minds in earlier generations. Your careful copying doesn't preserve alien understanding. It ensures that Egyptian insights, refined through Greek methods, can teach and heal and guide minds that will never see the sacred Nile. Sleep comes as naturally as sunset after a day of honest labor. Your breathing deepens to match the eternal rhythms of river and cartwheel, heartbeat and temple bell. The boy who began this day troubled by divided loyalties ends it understanding that true loyalty requires serving wisdom wherever it leads, with whatever tools heritage provides. Alexandria waits ahead, not as a place of cultural conflict, but as the gathering point where all human seeking meets and mingles and becomes something greater than any tradition could achieve alone. Your small hands, trained in Egyptian reverence for written understanding, will serve the largest possible purpose, ensuring that truth discovered anywhere can reach anyone capable of receiving it with appropriate gratitude. The eternal work continues, and you have found your place within it, not as Egyptian or Greek, but as human, devoted to protecting everything that helps humanity reach toward divine understanding. The first light of dawn filters through the latticed windows of your comfortable chamber in the Scribes' quarter of Alexandria. You wake not to the anxious uncertainty of youth, but to the steady rhythms of a life well established. 31 years have passed since that afternoon when understanding crystallized in Khnum's cart, and you are no longer the nervous boy who feared choosing between Egyptian tradition and universal wisdom. You are Ketty, 45 years old, senior copyist in the Great Library, keeper of the restricted Egyptian collections. Your hands, no longer smooth with youth, bear the permanent stains of countless inks. Blue from lapis lazuli, red from cinnabar, black from carbon and gum arabic. These marks tell the story of 3 decades spent guarding the world's accumulated learning. The sounds that greet your morning have changed as well. From the courtyard below comes the voice of your son, Jedhor, now 16, practicing his recitation of hieroglyphic texts with the same careful precision you once brought to learning Greek letters. His pronunciation flows flawlessly in both Egyptian and Greek. A child of 2 worlds who moves between them as naturally as walking from sunlight into shade. The scribe who records the words of the gods must speak with the authority of both traditions. You hear him saying to himself, repeating the lesson you taught him years ago. Pride warms your chest as you recognize your own methods in his patient practice. Nefret moves quietly in the kitchen, preparing the morning meal with the efficient grace of a woman who has managed a household for 15 years. The daughter of a master weaver, she brought to your marriage not just her own skills but understanding of how traditional crafts serve larger purposes. Her looms produce the finest linen for wrapping the most precious scrolls, while her practical wisdom keeps your intellectual pursuits grounded in the needs of daily life. The aroma of fresh bread mingles with the sharp scent of the black ink you mixed last evening. Preparation for today's urgent work. But this morning carries an undercurrent of tension that has been absent from the peaceful routines of recent years. Through your window, you can see unusual activity in the streets. Royal messengers have been moving through the city since before dawn, carrying sealed proclamations that will change everything. You dress in the fine linen tunic that marks your elevated status, Egyptian in cut, but dyed with expensive Tyrian purple that speaks to your prosperity. The young apprentice who once worried about wearing clothes above his station has become a man whose expertise commands respect from intellectuals across the Mediterranean world. Your writing box, made from imported ebony and inlaid with silver, holds reed pens crafted to your exact specifications and inks mixed according to formulas you've perfected over decades. As you descend to join your family for breakfast, aged Seneb rises from his corner chair with the careful movements of a man past 70. Your father's face lights with the same quiet pride that has greeted your achievements since the day you first brought home a scroll you had copied without error. The dye-stained hands that once shaped your earliest understanding of precision now tremble slightly, but his eyes remain sharp with interest in your work. The city feels different this morning, Seneb observes, his voice still carrying the authority of someone who has watched Alexandria change across 7 decades. There's fear in the air, the kind that comes when powerful men make decisions that ordinary people must live with. Nefret sets bowls of barley porridge sweetened with dates before the family, but her usual morning efficiency cannot hide her concern. The market women whisper about proclamations, she says quietly, something about foreign intellectuals, about loyalty to the crown. You break your bread with deliberate calm, though your mind already races toward the implications. For months, tension has been building as young Ptolemy Philometor struggles with the aftermath of his mother's death and the aggressive policies of his advisors Linnaeus and the eunuch Eulaeus. The learned community has sensed the changing political winds, but hoped their devotion to wisdom would protect them from court suspicion. Jedor looks between his parents with the sharp intuition of youth. Father, will the troubles affect our work in the library? The question hangs in the morning air like incense, heavy with significance. You meet your son's gaze, seeing in his eyes the same hunger for understanding that once drove you to risk everything for the chance to serve in the Mouseion. How do you explain to a boy who has grown up surrounded by the treasures of human learning that such treasures can become dangerous when rulers fear their own people? Learning itself never threatens anyone, you reply carefully, but those who preserve understanding sometimes become caught between competing loyalties. We may face difficult choices in the days ahead. The walk to the great Mouseion reveals the full scope of the morning's changes. Royal guards stand posted at intervals along the main thoroughfares, not the ceremonial honor guards usually seen during festivals, but armed soldiers with the alert bearing of men expecting trouble. Citizens move with unusual haste, their conversations conducted in whispers that cease when strangers approach. As you approach the magnificent complex that has been your professional home for the past 15 years, pride still swells in your chest despite the morning's tensions. The Mouseion rises before you like a vision of human ambition made stone, towering columns of imported marble that dwarf even the greatest temples, their capitals carved with intricate designs that blend Egyptian lotus motifs with Greek acanthus leaves. The sheer scale still takes your breath away, colonnades that stretch farther than a bowshot, supporting roofs high enough to house the masts of the largest grain ships. You remember your first day here as a newly appointed senior copyist when Apollodoros personally escorted you from the humble Serapeum to these halls where the greatest minds of the age pursue their investigations. The transition from the daughter library's comfortable familiarity to this monument of learning had seemed almost overwhelming. Walking through courtyards large enough to hold entire neighborhoods, past fountains whose bronze sculptures depict the muses inspiring mortal intellectuals, beneath ceilings painted with star maps that rival the heavens themselves. The gardens that surround the complex showcase plants gathered from across the known world, specimens that serve both aesthetic beauty and academic investigation. Date palms from Mesopotamia grow beside olive trees from Athens, while medicinal herbs from India flourish in carefully tended plots where physicians conduct their work. Even the walkways tell stories of empire and learning. Mosaics crafted from stones quarried in distant provinces create geometric patterns that demonstrate mathematical principles while beautifying the paths where philosophers debate. But it's the library halls themselves that never fail to inspire reverence. Corridors lined floor to ceiling with manuscript alcoves stretch beyond the limits of sight, each section organized according to the great cataloging system developed by Callimachus decades ago. The copying chambers where you spend your days feature windows positioned to capture the perfect quality of light needed for detailed work, while ingenious ventilation systems keep the air fresh enough to prevent the headaches that plague scribes in lesser institutions. Your own workspace, a privilege earned through years of demonstrated excellence, occupies a corner position near the astronomy section, close enough to consult mathematical texts when your copying requires precision in calculations. The cedar writing desk, imported at considerable expense from the forests of Lebanon, provides a surface smooth enough for the finest work, while built-in compartments hold your collection of specialized tools, reed pens cut to different specifications, inks mixed according to your own formulas, and measuring instruments that ensure absolute accuracy in reproducing diagrams. This morning, however, the architectural wonder that usually fills you with quiet satisfaction instead emphasizes the magnitude of what stands at risk. The same magnificent halls that represent Alexandria's commitment to universal learning could tomorrow echo with the footsteps of investigators searching for evidence of foreign corruption. The same international character that makes the Mouseion the crown jewel of Mediterranean scholarship now marks it as potentially dangerous in the eyes of a paranoid court. As you pass through the bronze gates, each leaf decorated with reliefs depicting the founding of the library by Ptolemy Soter, the altered atmosphere becomes unmistakable. Clusters of worried faces replace the usual animated discussions of astronomical calculations and philosophical propositions. Near the main copying hall, you find Master Apollodoros, now aged 75 but still sharp-minded, in heated discussion with several senior intellectuals. His Greek features, once merely foreign, now seem to mark him as potentially suspect in ways that 3 decades of devoted service cannot overcome. The man who taught you to see wisdom as universal property faces the reality that court authorities may not share such elevated perspectives. The proclamation leaves little room for interpretation, Apollodoros says, his voice carrying the weight of someone who has read official documents with careful attention to precise language. All academics of non-Egyptian birth who cannot demonstrate unquestionable loyalty to the crown and the traditional gods of Egypt must report for review of their status. Demetrios of Athens, whose commentaries on Homer have enriched the library's collection for 20 years, asks the question that haunts every foreign-born intellectual: what constitutes unquestionable loyalty to advisors who see enemies in every shadow? The answer, unspoken but understood by all, lies not in decades of faithful service, but in the current needs of court paranoia. Young Ptolemy Philometor, guided by Linnaeus and the eunuch Eulaeus, faces threats from his uncle Antiochus Epiphanes, while managing internal pressures from his brother Physcon. In such circumstances, foreign intellectuals with connections across the Mediterranean world represent exactly the kind of cosmopolitan influence that nervous advisors fear. Miriam appears at your side, her face grave but determined. The years have silvered her hair but not dimmed the intelligence that made her invaluable to the Septuagint project. "Ketty," she says quietly, "we need to speak privately. There are preparations to be made." You follow her to one of the smaller reading chambers away from the anxious crowds. Here, surrounded by the mathematical works that seem so removed from court turmoil, she reveals the scope of the crisis developing around you. "The king's advisors have prepared lists," she explains, her voice barely above a whisper. "Intellectuals to be expelled, their works to be examined for seditious content. Your master Apollodoros appears among the first to be questioned. They claim his correspondence with colleagues in Athens and Rhodes suggests dangerous foreign sympathies." The words strike you like physical blows. Apollodoros, whose patient teaching opened your mind to the unity underlying all understanding, branded as dangerous because he maintained learned friendships across cultural boundaries. The very connections that make Alexandria the center of learning become evidence of disloyalty in the paranoid calculations of court power. How long do we have, you ask, though part of you already knows the answer will be measured in days rather than weeks. The royal guards begin their interviews tomorrow, Miriam replies. Foreign academics have perhaps a week to arrange their affairs before departure becomes mandatory. The euphemism cannot disguise the harsh reality. Expulsion means not just personal exile, but the scattering of irreplaceable understanding. When intellectuals flee, they cannot carry their life's work with them. Scrolls too precious or bulky for hasty travel will remain behind, vulnerable to officials who may see foreign learning as inherently suspicious. That evening, your household gathers around the oil lamps as shadows deepen outside. The familiar rituals of family life, Nefret's careful arrangement of cushions, Jedhor's respectful attention to his elders, Seneb's thoughtful silence as he considers weighty matters, provide an anchor of stability in a day that has shaken the foundations of everything you've built. You explain the crisis in terms that honor both your father's traditional wisdom and your son's eager intelligence. The foreign academics who have become your colleagues and friends face exile not for any wrongdoing, but because their very presence challenges court advisors' narrow definition of Egyptian loyalty. Precious understanding, accumulated over generations, risks being lost or destroyed because it carries the taint of foreign association. Seneb listens with the patience of a man who has lived through previous court upheavals. When you finish, he nods slowly, his weathered hands folded over the walking stick that has supported him for the past 5 years. In my youth, he says quietly, I saw what happens when rulers try to divide learning into Egyptian and foreign categories. The Persians attempted something similar, declaring that only Persian wisdom was fit for Persian subjects. They succeeded mainly in impoverishing their own understanding. His words carry the authority of lived experience, but also the weight of a decision that transcends personal comfort. The question isn't whether foreign understanding deserves care, he continues. The question becomes whether we have the courage to protect it despite official disapproval. Nefret, ever practical, raises the concerns that keep households functioning when great principles collide with daily realities. What risks would we face? Our home, our livelihood, Jedhor's future, all depend on your position in the library. Is it wise to jeopardize everything for colleagues who may not survive exile, regardless of our efforts? Her questions are fair and necessary. A woman who has spent 15 years building a secure life for her family deserves honest consideration of what that security might cost. But as she speaks, you see in her eyes not opposition to heroic action, but the practical wisdom that wants to ensure heroism serves achievable goals. Jedhor, who has absorbed years of dinner conversations about the unity of understanding, asks the question that cuts to the heart of the moral dilemma. Father, if we protect only Egyptian learning while letting Greek and Jewish wisdom disappear, aren't we betraying everything you taught me about truth belonging to all humanity? From the mouth of a 16-year-old comes the clearest statement of what's at stake. The boy who has grown up bilingual and bicultural sees immediately what court authority refuses to acknowledge, that learning loses its power to serve truth when forced into artificial divisions. You look around the circle of lamplight at faces that represent different stages of your own journey. Seneb, whose sacrifice enabled your education, now trusting that education to guide difficult choices. Nefret, whose partnership has provided the stability necessary for serious intellectual work, willing to risk that stability for principles larger than personal comfort. Jedhor, who embodies the future synthesis of traditions, already understanding what his generation must preserve for the next. Miriam spoke of preparations, you say carefully. There are ways to protect understanding, even when its guardians face exile. Secret copying, hidden archives, circles of intellectuals willing to maintain connections despite official suspicion. But such work requires courage. Seneb completes your thought. The same kind of courage that led a dye worker's son to reach beyond his expected place in the world. Except now, the stakes involve not just personal advancement, but the care of learning itself. Nefret reaches across the circle to take your hand, her calloused fingers, marked by years of working with loom and spindle, intertwining with your ink-stained ones. "We didn't build this life to hide from difficult choices when they finally arrive," she says simply. "What needs to be done?" The family council becomes a planning session. Jador, with his perfect command of both scripts, can copy texts in ways that disguise their foreign origins. Nefret's contacts among the textile workers provide access to materials needed for secret care: fine linen for wrapping, cedar oil for protection against insects, sealed jars for long-term storage. Even Seneb, despite his age, offers the wisdom of someone who knows which neighborhoods harbor families sympathetic to learning over court orthodoxy. As the lamps burn lower and plans take shape, you feel the weight of decision settling into certainty. The nervous boy who once feared choosing between traditions has become a man capable of choosing protection over comfort, understanding over safety, universal wisdom over narrow loyalty. Tomorrow will bring action. Quiet, careful, dangerous action that honors everything your journey has revealed about the true nature of wisdom and its proper guardians. The work begins before dawn. In the pre-daylight hours, when the library stands empty except for the guards who know your face and trust your purpose, you move through the restricted collections with purpose born of 3 decades' intimate familiarity with their organization. Miriam meets you in the Hebrew manuscript section, her arms already laden with scrolls that represent irreplaceable bridges between Jewish wisdom and Greek scholarship. The Septuagint translation, still incomplete, faces particular danger. A project that explicitly acknowledges the value of making Hebrew insights accessible to non-Hebrew readers could easily be condemned as undermining traditional religious boundaries. "The most dangerous texts first," she whispers, as you work together to identify scrolls that face the greatest risk. Philosophical works that cite multiple cultural traditions, scientific treatises that build explicitly upon foreign sources, medical texts that synthesize Egyptian, Greek, and Persian approaches to healing. All of the boundary-crossing scholarship that makes Alexandria unique becomes liability when court authority demands cultural purity. Your copying proceeds with the efficiency of long practice, but also with innovations born of necessity. Jedor works beside you, his young eyes better suited to the demanding precision required for small-format copies. Instead of the large, formal scripts appropriate for ceremonial scrolls, you develop condensed writing styles that pack maximum content into minimum space. Egyptian hieratic, already cursive and compact, becomes even more abbreviated. Greek uncials shrink to sizes that challenge even trained readers but preserve every essential detail. The protection circle extends beyond the library itself. In workshops throughout the Scribes Quarter, trusted colleagues undertake similar secret copying. Egyptian-born academics use their status to safeguard works by foreign-born friends. Jewish translators like Miriam coordinate with both Egyptian and Greek intellectuals to ensure that multiple copies of crucial texts survive in different locations. Nefret transforms your home into a distribution center for care materials. Her weaving workshop, already equipped with storage areas for valuable textiles, easily accommodates the sealed jars and protective wrappings needed for long-term manuscript storage. Her connections among craft workers provide access to supplies without arousing official suspicion. Who would question a weaver's need for large quantities of fine linen? The technical challenges prove surprisingly manageable. Your hands, trained by decades of careful copying, adapt quickly to the demands of secret care. The real difficulty lies in selection, choosing which texts to copy when time and materials limit how much can be saved. Each decision represents a judgment about which understanding future generations will most need, which insights risk disappearing forever if not protected now. Working by lamplight in your study, you focus on Apollodoros' anatomical studies, detailed observations that build upon both Egyptian embalming wisdom and Greek systematic dissection. These represent exactly the kind of cross-cultural synthesis that court authority now views with suspicion, but they also contain medical insights that could save countless lives in generations to come. As you copy diagrams that map the human circulatory system with unprecedented accuracy, you understand that this work serves not just academic care, but humanitarian necessity. The techniques for stopping arterial bleeding, the methods for setting complex bone fractures, the understanding of how different organs function in health and disease. All of this learning transcends cultural boundaries because human bodies remain fundamentally the same regardless of the court systems that govern them. By the fourth night of intensive copying, your household has become part of a larger circle that spans Alexandria's learned community. Messages pass between houses through servants who understand the importance of discretion. Copying materials move through channels that bypass official scrutiny. Multiple copies of the most crucial texts find their way to different hiding places, ensuring that court action cannot eliminate essential understanding through a single raid. The work requires not just technical skill, but moral courage that deepens with each passing day. Every scroll you copy represents a choice to serve truth over authority, universal wisdom over narrow loyalty, future benefit over present comfort. The boy who once worried about cultural betrayal has become a man actively defying court demands in service of larger cultural care. On the seventh night, the protection circle faces its greatest test. Word has spread that court investigators will begin examining the library's collections the following morning, searching for evidence of foreign corruption among the scrolls. Any texts that show obvious foreign authorship or explicitly acknowledge non-Egyptian sources will be subject to confiscation and possible destruction. The night air carries the scent of jasmine from hidden gardens as you and Jador load a cart with carefully wrapped bundles. To casual observation, you appear to be a merchant moving textile goods between workshops. Exactly the impression Nefret's professional connections are designed to create. But beneath the layers of fine linen rest copies of irreplaceable manuscripts, representing the best of human learning from multiple traditions. Miriam coordinates the movement of other carts through different routes across the city. The circle operates like the cells of academic correspondence that have connected Alexandria to centers of learning across the Mediterranean, each group knowing only what it needs to know, each route independent of the others, all serving the same essential purpose. Your destination lies in the old Egyptian quarter where traditional families maintain houses that have served the learned community for generations. Here, in cellars originally built for storing grain during times of uncertainty, new archives take shape. Climate-controlled chambers, protected by families whose loyalty to learning transcends their fear of court authority. Marilyn said the transfer proceeds with the efficiency of a well-rehearsed ritual. Sealed jars containing the most precious copies disappear into storage areas that have protected valuable things through previous upheavals. Lists of contents, written in scripts only trusted academics can read, ensure that future generations will know what treasures wait in these hidden repositories. As you work in whispered coordination with other members of the protection circle, you feel a profound sense of historical continuity. This is how understanding has always survived times of court turbulence, through the courage of individuals willing to risk personal safety for intellectual care. The same impulse that led Egyptian priests to hide sacred texts during foreign invasions, that motivated Greek intellectuals to maintain works during times of war, that drives Jewish communities to preserve their learning despite persecution. When the last card empties and the final scrolls find secure storage, exhaustion mingles with satisfaction in ways that remind you of completing any difficult but worthwhile task. Like the harvest celebrations of your childhood, when hard work culminated in the security of knowing that essential needs would be met through the dangerous season ahead. Jedhor walks beside you through the pre-dawn streets as you return home, his young face showing the kind of mature satisfaction that comes from participating in work larger than personal ambition. "Father," he says quietly, "will the copies we made tonight really survive long enough to matter?" The question touches the heart of faith that drives all care efforts. The belief that understanding carefully guarded through dark times will eventually find minds capable of appreciating and extending it. You think of the ancient Egyptian texts that survived multiple foreign conquests, the Greek works that endured court upheavals, the Jewish writings that maintained their wisdom despite repeated dispersions. Learning has a way of surviving when it serves human need, you reply, your voice carrying the confidence of someone who has spent 30 years watching how intellectual treasures find their way to minds capable of receiving them. What we protected tonight will outlast the court fears that made protection necessary. The morning call to prayer drifts across the awakening city as you reach your home. Inside, Nefret waits with hot bread and the kind of practical comfort that sustains those who serve causes larger than themselves. Seneb dozes in his chair but wakes as you enter, his ancient eyes bright with curiosity about the night's success. "It is finished," you tell him simply, and watch relief spread across his weathered features. The man whose sacrifice enabled your education now sees that education serving its highest possible purpose, ensuring that human wisdom survives human folly. As consciousness begins to soften around the edges, lulled by the satisfaction of difficult work completed and the familiar rhythms of family life restored, you prepare for sleep with the deep peace that comes from moral alignment. The protection circle has succeeded beyond what anyone dared hope possible. Understanding that court authority sought to destroy or scatter now rests safely in archives that will guard it through whatever turbulence lies ahead. Tomorrow will bring new challenges as the investigation begins and the learned community adapts to its reduced circumstances. But tonight brings the rest that comes from understanding that courage in service of wisdom creates its own form of immortality. As sleep settles over your satisfied household, consciousness drifts into deeper understanding of the historical currents that your protection work serves. Beyond tonight's immediate crisis lie the larger patterns that will shape Alexandria's destiny over the coming decades and centuries. The court tensions that drove tonight's urgent copying represent more than royal paranoia. They signal the beginning of Alexandria's gradual transformation from an independent center of Greek learning into a Roman provincial city. The weak Ptolemaic successors who follow will lack both the vision and the resources to maintain the library's former magnificence. Roman influence grows stronger with each passing year, bringing different priorities and different attitudes toward learning. The changes unfold across generations. Under Roman rule, the great Mouseion survives, but its character shifts fundamentally. Roman administrators, while respectful of learning, view understanding primarily as a tool for governance and military advantage rather than as an end in itself. The broad philosophical inquiries that made Alexandria famous gradually give way to more practical studies, engineering for public works, medicine for army hospitals, astronomy for navigation, and calendar reform. Yet, the protection methods you helped create tonight ensure that essential understanding survives these transitions. The hidden archives become crucial when budget pressures force the library to reduce its acquisitions. Texts that might otherwise be discarded or neglected remain safely stored, waiting for more enlightened times. The secret copying techniques you perfected enable intellectuals to maintain unofficial collections that supplement the official holdings. The practical skills your family contributed prove invaluable during Alexandria's decline. Nefret's methods for protecting manuscripts with fine textiles and aromatic oils become essential as the library's maintenance standards deteriorate. Her innovation of using weaving expertise for care enables private collectors to maintain their scrolls in better condition than some of the official collections. The multicultural cooperation that characterized tonight's protection efforts becomes a model for how learning survives institutional fragmentation. When Roman rule divides the intellectual community along ethnic lines, the circles you helped establish enable Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish intellectuals to continue sharing understanding despite official boundaries. Underground scholarly exchange replaces the open collaboration that once flourished in the Mouseion's halls. Emperor Claudius adds new buildings to the complex between 41 and 54 CE, calling his addition the Claudian Museum. But even imperial support proves inconsistent. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus suspends the Mouseion's revenues entirely, abolishing members' stipends and expelling foreign intellectuals. The institution that once attracted the Mediterranean world's finest minds increasingly becomes a refuge for court appointees, rather than genuine researchers. By 272 CE, Emperor Aurelian's war against Queen Zenobia seriously damages the Brucheian district where the Mouseion stands. The palace complex that once housed the world's greatest concentration of learning suffers destruction by fire. Whatever survives faces further devastation when Diocletian sacks Alexandria in 297 CE, leveling entire sections of the city. Yet knowledge endures through the dispersal patterns established centuries earlier. When Ptolemy VIII expelled foreign intellectuals in 145 BCE, they carried texts and methods to Athens, Pergamon, and Rhodes. These scattered centers maintain Alexandrian traditions of careful copying and systematic organization long after the original institution falls silent. The daughter library in the Serapeum continues functioning into the 4th century, serving Alexandria's general population with copied works from the main collection. But in 391 CE, Patriarch Theophilus leads Christian mobs against the temple, destroying the building and burning the scrolls stored in its surrounding cloisters. The books burn splendidly, witnesses report, as centuries of preserved wisdom disappears in flames driven by religious hatred rather than natural decay. The murder of Hypatia in 415 CE by Christian zealots marks the symbolic end of Alexandria's role as a center of rational inquiry. The woman who taught mathematics and philosophy at the Mouseion becomes the last great intellectual associated with the institution that once epitomized human curiosity about the natural world. Now you observe the extraordinary ways in which tonight's protection work participates in humanity's most remarkable achievement, the transmission of understanding across cultural and temporal boundaries through dedicated individual effort rather than institutional guarantee. The diaspora that begins with scholar expulsions creates new centers where Alexandrian methods take root and flourish. In Athens, Alexandrian refugees establish schools that combine traditional Greek philosophical inquiry with the systematic research techniques developed in the Mouseion. The careful cataloging methods pioneered by Callimachus influence how these new institutions organize their growing collections. At Pergamon, intellectuals who fled Alexandria's court paranoia help create the rival library that once prompted the Ptolemies to restrict papyrus exports. The innovation of parchment, animal hide prepared as writing material, emerges from this rivalry and proves more durable than fragile papyrus. Texts copied onto parchment survive Alexandria's climate and outlast the institution that spurned them. But the most remarkable preservation occurs through translation rather than simple copying. As Greek cultural influence wanes, Syriac-speaking Christian scholars become the vital bridge between classical antiquity and the emerging medieval world. At centers like Nisibis, translators work with the same patient dedication you applied to tonight's copying, rendering Greek texts into Syriac and then into Arabic. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, this translation movement reaches extraordinary scope. In Baghdad, Cairo, and even in Alexandria itself, under Islamic rule, learned men undertake systematic efforts to preserve Greek scientific and philosophical works through Arabic versions. The writings of Euclid, whose geometry you may have copied tonight, find new life in Arabic mathematical treatises, Galen's medical observations, possibly among the anatomical studies you protected, guide Islamic physicians for centuries. Aristotle's logical and scientific works, standardized in Alexandria's halls, reach medieval European universities through this Arabic bridge. Thomas Aquinas builds his theological systems upon Aristotelian foundations that survived because Islamic intellectuals valued Greek philosophical methods enough to preserve them through translation. The courage that drives tonight's secret copying finds its ultimate vindication in cathedral schools and universities that will not exist for centuries. Christian monasteries developed their own preservation traditions based partly on Alexandrian models. Irish, English, and Carolingian scribes working in monastery scriptoriums employ copying techniques refined in institutions like the Serapeum. The same attention to accuracy, the same reverence for written wisdom, the same understanding that knowledge requires constant care to survive. All these principles guide monastic preservation efforts that save classical Latin literature through the Dark Ages. The shift from papyrus scrolls to parchment codices, the familiar book form, occurs gradually but proves crucial for long-term survival. Texts not deemed worthy of transcription to the new format disappear, but those that make the transition gain centuries of additional life. The economic and technical innovations that enable this transition stem partly from methods developed in Alexandria's workshops and refinement houses. Byzantine scholars maintain their own version of the Alexandrian tradition through imperial palace libraries in Constantinople. Emperor Constantine and his successors actively gather manuscripts, creating collections that preserve Greek philosophical and scientific works through the Byzantine millennium. When Constantinople falls to Ottoman forces, many of these manuscripts scatter across Europe, enriching Renaissance libraries with classical texts that trace their lineage back to Alexandrian copying rooms. Even the popular story of Caliph Omar burning Alexandria's remaining books, now recognized as legend without historical foundation, reveals the power of the institution's reputation. The tale persists because people understand intuitively that the loss of such concentrated wisdom would constitute genuine tragedy for human civilization. The dispersion ensures survival through redundancy rather than centralization. Instead of depending on a single magnificent institution, vulnerable to political pressure, fire, or religious fanaticism, knowledge spreads through networks of smaller centers, private collections, and individual scholars who carry essential texts with them as they move between courts and cities. Your family's contribution to tonight's efforts becomes part of this vast, largely invisible infrastructure that enables knowledge to outlast the institutions that created it. Every hidden archive established tonight represents a node in the network that will preserve understanding through whatever political storms lie ahead. The techniques pioneered in Alexandria continue shaping how humanity preserves knowledge long after the last column falls and the final scroll crumbles. The methods you apply tonight, systematic copying, hidden storage, collaborative networks, become the foundation for every subsequent effort to protect learning from political hostility or institutional failure. Callimachus's cataloging innovations, developed to organize the Mousseion's vast collection, influence library science for millennia. The Pinakes, his 120-book catalog system organizing texts by subject and author, establishes principles still used in modern libraries. The small identification tags attached to each scroll, providing author, title, and subject information, represent humanity's first systematic use of metadata. Every library card catalog, every computer database, every digital search function traces its conceptual ancestry to techniques refined in the halls where you work. The aggressive acquisition policies that built Alexandria's collection, purchasing texts, copying confiscated books, commissioning translations, become standard practice for later institutions seeking comprehensive coverage of human knowledge. Medieval monasteries, Renaissance libraries, and modern universities all employ versions of strategies first systematized by the Ptolemies. But more than specific techniques, Alexandria establishes the principle that knowledge belongs to humanity rather than to particular rulers or cultures. The translation projects that rendered Egyptian, Persian, Hebrew, and Indian texts into Greek create the precedent for scholarly translation movements throughout history. When Islamic scholars translate Greek works into Arabic, when medieval translators render Arabic texts into Latin, when Renaissance humanists make classical works accessible in vernacular languages, all continue the Alexandrian tradition of making wisdom available across cultural boundaries. The model of state-supported research institutions begins here and influences every subsequent attempt to create centers where intellectuals can pursue investigation without concern for immediate practical application. Modern universities, research institutes, and national academies all reflect the Ptolemaic insight that supporting learning serves long-term cultural and political interests, even when specific benefits cannot be immediately calculated. The preservation networks established tonight demonstrate principles that prove crucial during every subsequent period of political upheaval or religious persecution. When medieval scholars hide classical texts from religious authorities, when Renaissance humanists preserve manuscripts during wars, when modern librarians protect collections during revolutions, all employ strategies refined through centuries of Alexandrian experience. The collaboration between scholars from different cultural traditions, which characterizes tonight's efforts, becomes essential for major advances in human understanding. The synthesis of Egyptian astronomical observations with Greek mathematical methods, the integration of Jewish ethical insights with Greek logical analysis, the combination of Persian medical knowledge with Egyptian anatomical expertise. These cross-cultural exchanges establish patterns that repeat whenever diverse intellectual traditions encounter each other productively. Your son Jedor's bilingual abilities developed in a household that honors both Egyptian and Greek learning represent the kind of cultural bridge building that enables knowledge to survive political boundaries. Future scholars who master multiple languages and cultural perspectives continue this tradition. Whether they translate Greek classics in Carolingian monasteries, render Arabic texts in medieval Spain, or create new syntheses in Renaissance Italy. Nefert's innovations in manuscript preservation, using textile expertise to protect scrolls with appropriate wrappings and aromatic oils, influence conservation practices that keep ancient texts readable for modern scholars. The principles she develops through practical experimentation guide preservation efforts in libraries and museums worldwide, ensuring that humanity's earliest written records remain accessible to future generations. The economic insights that drive tonight's work, understanding that intellectual resources require sustained investment and protection, shape cultural policy throughout history. Rulers who support learning during difficult times, patrons who fund copying projects during political instability, communities that maintain schools and libraries despite economic pressure, all demonstrate wisdom first articulated in Ptolemaic support for the Mouseion. Even the architectural innovations that house Alexandria's collections influence the design of later libraries. The combination of storage areas, reading rooms, copying chambers, and residential quarters integrated into a single complex becomes the model for institutional design that balances preservation with accessibility. The gardens and courtyards that provide pleasant environments for scholarly reflection appear in universities and monasteries that follow Alexandrian precedents. The principle that drives all these innovations, that preserving knowledge serves purposes larger than any individual life or political system, finds its deepest expression in the quiet courage displayed tonight. When you choose to risk personal security for intellectual preservation, you join an eternal community of guardians who understand that human civilization depends on maintaining access to the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. Tonight's work serves not abstract principles, but concrete human needs that persist through all the political changes ahead. The preservation of understanding ensures that future physicians can heal more effectively, that engineers can build more safely, that farmers can grow food more reliably, that navigators can travel with greater confidence across dangerous seas. The medical texts you copied will help Roman army doctors treat plague outbreaks that periodically ravage the empire's cities. The astronomical observations you preserved will enable more accurate calendar calculations that help farmers plant crops at optimal times throughout the Mediterranean world. The mathematical principles you saved will inform engineers building aqueducts that supply fresh water to growing populations across 3 continents. The cultural synthesis achieved in your household, Egyptian precision, Greek logic, Jewish translation skills, Roman administrative efficiency, becomes a model for how diverse traditions can strengthen rather than threaten each other. The cooperation that characterized tonight's preservation efforts will be remembered when future intellectuals face similar challenges, providing both practical methods and moral encouragement for protecting learning during difficult times. The secret archives you created represent more than emergency measures. They establish the principle that knowledge belongs ultimately to humanity, rather than to any particular ruler or institution. This understanding influences how Roman authorities approach scholarship, leading to more enlightened policies that support learning for its inherent value, rather than merely for political utility. Your family's willingness to risk comfort for the sake of knowledge preservation establishes a tradition that influences Alexandria's intellectual life for generations. The practical courage you demonstrated, choosing difficult, right action over easy inaction, becomes part of the city's collective memory, inspiring similar choices when future crises threaten the survival of learning. The anxieties which once troubled your youth were resolved, not through philosophical argument but through lived experience that demonstrated the unity underlying apparent divisions. Egyptian heritage and Greek innovation, local loyalty and universal service, practical craft and abstract learning, all these seemingly opposed elements found harmony through patient work in service of knowledge that benefits everyone. The boy who once worried about betraying tradition by serving foreign learning became the man who discovered that true tradition involves adapting ancient wisdom to serve contemporary needs. The scribe who feared choosing between cultures became the guardian who ensured that all cultures could contribute their gifts to the common treasury of human understanding. Sleep comes now as the deepest possible satisfaction, not the satisfaction of achieving personal success, but the satisfaction of serving purposes larger than individual ambition. The preservation work is complete, the family is secure, the knowledge is protected, and the tradition of faithful scholarship will continue through whatever changes the future brings. In the gentle darkness of rest, you know with perfect certainty that tonight's choices aligned your life with the eternal purposes that guide all authentic learning. The cosmic work of human consciousness gradually awakening to truth will continue through other hands, other minds, other generations of patient guardians who understand that preserving wisdom is the highest form of love. The eternal library where all human seeking finds its fulfillment opens its doors to welcome you home. Long pause, then the gentlest possible reminder. The chain of knowledge that began in Alexandria continues today in libraries, universities, and research institutions around the world. The same spirit of preserving wisdom for future generations that guided tonight's work still inspires librarians, teachers, and scholars who understand that every act of preservation serves humanity's deepest needs. The dream of centuries fades slowly as consciousness returns to the familiar weight of your body beneath linen covers. Dawn light filters through the latticed window, but instead of peace, your first sensation is the tight knot of unease that has lodged itself in your chest since awakening. The visions of future vindication dissolve like mist at sunrise, leaving only the harsh reality of what today will bring. Beside you, Nefret shifts restlessly, her breathing revealing that she too has slept poorly despite exhaustion. The secret work is finished. the archives hidden. But this daybreak brings the investigation you've all been dreading. Even now you can hear unusual activity in the streets beyond your courtyard, the measured footsteps of official guards, the nervous murmur of neighbors discussing what the proclamations might mean for their own households. "Are you awake?" Nefret whispers, her voice barely audible in the pre-dawn quiet. "Yes," you reply, though your throat feels dry with worry. "I keep thinking about the hidden chambers. What if someone talks? What if they search more thoroughly than we expected?" She turns toward you in the dim light, her face etched with the same concerns that have kept you both tossing through the night. "Seneb has been awake for an hour," she murmurs. "I can hear him moving about, and Jedhor was talking in his sleep, something about scrolls and guards." From the next room comes the soft sound of your father's walking stick against the floor, confirming Nefret's observation. At 70, Seneb has learned to wake early when fear troubles his mind, preferring to face difficult thoughts in the gradual light of daybreak rather than in the stark darkness that makes everything seem worse. You sit up carefully, your body protesting after nights of intensive copying followed by restless sleep. Through the window, Alexandria begins its daily routine, but with an undercurrent of tension that speaks to how much has changed since yesterday's dawn. Vendors call their wares with less enthusiasm. Citizens move more quickly, avoiding gatherings that might attract official attention. "What we did was necessary," you say quietly, more to convince yourself than to reassure Nefret. But necessary and safe are not the same thing. She reaches for your hand, her fingers still bearing faint ink stains from her own work preparing protective materials. Do you regret it? The question hangs between you in the early stillness. Yesterday, driven by moral clarity and the urgency of imminent crisis, the choice had seemed obvious. Today, facing the possibility of investigation, exile, or worse, doubt creeps in like water finding a cracked foundation. "No," you say, finally, surprised by the firmness in your own voice. "Not the choice itself, but I regret that we had to make it. I regret that preserving wisdom requires secrecy and risk." From the courtyard comes the sound of Jedhor moving about, probably checking that the evidence of last night's work has been properly concealed. Your son has grown up overnight, transformed from an eager student into a young man who understands that some understanding must be protected from those who fear it. As daybreak progresses and no immediate crisis arrives, the sharp edge of unease begins to dull into something more manageable, not the absence of worry, but acceptance that some things lie beyond your control. You've done what conscience demanded. Forces larger than individual will control the outcome. Seneb appears in your doorway, fully dressed despite the early hour, his weathered face showing the kind of calm that comes from having lived through multiple crises. "The bread is ready," he says simply, "and the tea. No matter what today brings, we'll face it better with food in our stomachs." The household breakfast proceeds with unusual quiet, each person lost in private thoughts about what the day might hold. But gradually, the familiar rhythms of shared meal and preparation work their subtle magic. Nefret hums softly as she clears the dishes. Jedhor reviews his copying exercises with the same careful attention he brought to last night's dangerous work. Even your own breathing begins to slow and deepen as immediate panic gives way to longer-term perspective. "Father," Jedhor says during a pause in the routine, "no matter what happens today, I'm proud." His words carry the weight of someone who has discovered moral courage and found it to his liking. The boy who began this crisis worried about divided loyalties ends it understanding that true loyalty sometimes requires difficult choices. As the household prepares for what may be an extraordinary day, you find yourself returning to your bed, not for extended sleep, but for a few moments of quiet reflection before facing whatever investigation awaits. Nefret joins you, settling against your shoulder with the naturalness of long partnership. "We may have to leave Alexandria," you say quietly, voicing the possibility that has haunted all your planning. If they discover our involvement, exile becomes the best outcome we can hope for. Then we'll leave, she replies without hesitation. Jedor is old enough to travel. Your father survived one exile in his youth, and the skills we've developed here will serve us anywhere that values learning over fear. Her simple acceptance dissolves much of the remaining tension in your chest. No matter what comes, you won't face it alone. The loved ones who risked everything for the sake of wisdom will stand together through whatever results that choice brings. Outside, Alexandria continues its ancient rhythms. Merchants opening shops, students heading to lessons, scribes beginning their daily copying. But today, these familiar sounds carry deeper meaning. Each represents a choice to continue normal life despite court pressure, to maintain the routines that preserve civilization through difficult times. You close your eyes, feeling Nefret's steady breathing beside you, hearing the quiet sounds of Seneb and Jeter beginning their day with the same patient attention to detail that has always characterized your household. The visions of future vindication that filled your dreams seem less important now than this immediate reality. Relatives united in purpose, prepared to face any results their choices might bring. Sleep begins to reclaim you, not the deep unconsciousness of exhaustion, but the gentle rest that comes from doing right. You don't know what today's investigation will reveal. You can't control whether the hidden archives remain secret, or whether your household will still call Alexandria home by nightfall. But you know with absolute certainty that when future generations benefit from the wisdom you helped preserve, when young minds discover insights that might otherwise have been lost to court fear, when the chain of understanding continues unbroken despite temporary obstacles, your conscience will rest easy in knowing that when the moment demanded courage, you found it. If you've enjoyed this journey through ancient Alexandria with Ketty and his loved ones, please consider subscribing to Slumber Through Time for more immersive historical adventures. Sweet dreams, fellow guardians of wisdom.